This is Talk Radio 1190, Dallas-Fort Worth's place to talk.
And good afternoon, and welcome to the Therapy Hour with Rusty Lozano. We have a great show today. Today we're talking about mending broken relationships. And we've all been there before. If you've ever been dating, you ever been married, cohabitating, domestic partner, conflict always comes around. So, and there are a lot of things that can be done, communication-wise, help-wise in the community. What exactly are those things? So today we are talking about mending broken relationships, and we're bringing Kelly Antwine from the Reboot Ranch practice in Dallas, Texas, and Holly Fedro from the Center for Social Success. That's my own company. This company is brought to you by Center for Biofeedback and Behavior Therapy, but Center for Social Success for Holly Fedro. But before we get started, guys, I actually want to talk a little bit about the Paris attacks and a topic that's actually really disturbing. How do you bring this up with your kids? I didn't sleep really well the night this happened. Friday night, news broke, and it was all over the place. And you start thinking about, what's going to be on television. What are our kids being exposed to? How do you explain that? Now, as an adult, we can make sense of these things, and we can actually rationalize with our own experience. But before we get started with this topic, I really want to just visit with you guys about this a little bit. Kelly, what are some things that you would suggest parents do as far as talking to their kids about things that they see on television, terrorism, acts of terrorism?
Rusty, first, thank you for inviting me to be here today. I think the most important thing that parents can do is just validate their children's feelings. I think everyone's scared because these are random attacks on innocent people. And so, the natural thing for most parents to do is want to protect their children and avoid having any bad feelings or anything like that. But the fact is that children are going to be afraid. I think there's a lot of adults afraid too. And so just being honest and dealing with the reality of the situation, say, yeah, it's very scary. It's scary because,
these are things that are out of our control. And when you think about our children and how they understand the world, it's not very complicated. There are no in between. They can't rationalize future perspectives of death and
right.
Not being around. So it can actually be quite difficult to really bridge the gap and help them to understand those kinds of things.
Right. I think children tend to internalize it. I remember I was in the 4th grade when JFK was killed. I was living in Lubbock, Texas, and that took place here in Dallas, and I was scared to death that the person that killed JFK was going to come to Dallas and start killing people that I knew. So I think that's a natural thing for children to do, is to begin to worry how that's going to affect their world. And we need to honor that and let them know that we're going to do everything in our power to keep them safe. So,
and I'd like to chime in, Holly Fedro from the Center for Social Success. Sorry, you always get confused with that. But Holly, what tips could you give us a little bit of insight as far as what you would say to parents who have children that are curious about this topic?
Absolutely. And I also want to thank you for having me on today.
Yeah.
I think it's important, as Kelly was saying, to be honest with your children. They're going to see this on the TV and they're going to hear about it on the radio. It's everywhere. So it's really important that you take the time to sit down and have a conversation with your children about it. It's real important to keep it developmentally appropriate. Start by asking how much they know about the situation, so that you can kind of answer the questions specifically, but what is developmentally appropriate for them. It's also important, I think, to kind of minimize how much they're exposed to the television coverage, because it can be very re-traumatizing. and the TV tends to make things very sensationalized.
Yeah.
And so I think that having a healthy awareness that this happened and having an honest discussion with them about it's frightening, and we have care and concern for the victims in Paris. But we also want to help them feel like they're safe, and part of that is to minimize the re-traumatization of watching it over and over again on the news.
Yeah, watching it over on the news. And, I was just sitting there at the house on Friday, and my daughter was on her phone, and she says, "Hey, Dad, did you hear about what happened in Paris?" And so if any child has access to the internet, has a phone, and they're just kind of just doing their thing, if they're doing social media or playing games, they're bound to kind of run across this topic. So I think it's important for parents to kind of keep that in mind, that it's something that maybe they do want to check in on and just say, well, hey, what have you heard? Do you have any questions about that? Because I think that one of the things that we tend to forget is how accessible media is to us these days. It's immediate. It's on your phone. It's not, you don't necessarily have to wait for the news to premiere to actually learn about these things. It's there.
Right. I think one of the things, Rusty, that is at the base of all fear is powerlessness. And when we feel as if we're being that things are being done to us when we have absolutely no control over it, it really does escalate that fear component. So one of the things with children is to make some suggestions about maybe let's write letters to children in France, or let's draw the peace symbol using the Eiffel Tower and post those around. And what that does is that empowers a child to feel as if they're doing something proactive to fight against, this unknown, this entity that we all feel so powerless around.
And helplessness and vulnerability. I agree with that, Kelly. I think that's something that we, you want to help. I remember with the 9/11 attacks, I left work to go donate blood.
Right.
And there was a mile. I mean, it seemed like the line was a mile long. There were people outside the building and around the building. And it's interesting how these things kind of bring us together. And if the effort is to distract us and to pull us apart from each other, it seems like it's so different. We all kind of seem to pull together in times like this. So my heart goes out to all of the families that were affected by the Paris attacks. I know that there's at least one American casualty, and she was a student from UCal, I think. And it was just terrible because my wife and I, we traveled abroad there in 1998, and I remember that area really well. And I remember walking around town and exploring these things, and the thought of these attacks never even crossed my mind. So it's just interesting how it seems like that is now a filter, and how we're exploring and seeing the world these days is, well, that questionable what if. And so as a counselor, and in having counselors on the show today, it's awesome because we're an avenue of resources for these people. Kelly, we're going to shift into a segment on the mending broken relationships, but regarding this, how can people find you and find out where your practice is and learn a little bit about you?
Well, thank you again, Rusty, for asking the question. My website is www.rebootranch.com. I entitled my practice Reboot Ranch because it's a place where people can come to reboot their life. My phone number is 972-960-2222. That's the office number, and I'm notified every time that phone rings. So
awesome. Yeah, I noticed that you answer your own phones, too. Awesome,
well,
Kelly. When
you're the only guy there, that you have to kind of do everything. So.
That's awesome. And Holly, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Holly, how can people find you and get resource information from you in your practice?
Okay. We can be found at the website www.dristre.com, and that's DRISTRE.com. And our phone number is 972-404-3001. 3001.
Excellent. And I think this is important to kind of, and I wasn't actually intending on bringing this up today. It wasn't part of the show, but seeing the gravity of this, I think it's really important to really bridge the gap on this particular subject. And if you are struggling with needing help or needing to talk to somebody or getting some answers or even having some sort of a resource to help you with your children, there's always things that you can do out in the community. There are always people that are out there to help. And this is just a small sample of 2 individuals that can actually provide some help with that. And you can also visit me on my website, www.onlinebiofeedback.com. We work with kids on anxiety disorders and stress-related disorders, and we teach the important concept is that you learn to control your body, to control your emotional response. So you can actually learn to use stress management, active stress management, and help you with this. So if you're just joining us, we're talking about the Paris attacks, and we gave you some resources that you can find on the Metroplex to help you kind of answer questions about bringing this up with your children. But I do highly recommend that you research and do spend the time to kind of bring that up with your kids, because it's out there. You don't know what they've been exposed to, and you never really want to leave it up to a child to make sense of something, because they're not always going to do it in the best way. When we come back, mending broken relationships, and we're changing gears. Tune in. We are back, and today we're talking about mending broken relationships. We welcome our guest, Kelly Antwine from the Reboot Ranch in Dallas, Texas, and Holly Fedro from the Center for Social Success. If you've ever been in a relationship, you've had disagreements about money, about raising children perhaps, or about where you're going to live. Last night we had some dinner guests over, and they have been he wanted to have a party, and they didn't plan right, and that was a topic that they were having some issues about. It doesn't matter what it is. We all will have disagreements from time to time, but if these aren't addressed, they can actually fester and turn into major issues. And that's something that we don't want to actually, don't ever want to get to that point. So there are little things that we can do. There are little telltale indicators that are telling us that, okay, we're getting to a point that's getting beyond your conventional disagreement. And so what are those signs? How do you know when your relationship is starting to kind of take a turn for the worst? And what can we do about it? So we're going to talk to Holly Fedro from the Center for Social Success. Hi, Holly.
Hey, Rusty.
Okay. And tell us a little bit about how you work with this particular topic.
Okay. Well, thanks again for having me on.
Sure.
People come in because typically they have been trying to resolve conflicts for an extended period of time with little result. Unfortunately, people tend to come in later than they ought to. We ought to recognize when we're having a difficulty in one of the most important things in our lives, and that's in our most intimate and personal relationships. When I'm working with people, I look at 3 major things to kind of help me get a feel for how successful we're going to be in therapy. And the most important thing, I think, is where is your emotional investment? I really talk with the folks about where's your emotional investment. Is your emotional investment in repairing the conflict or the relationship, or is it winning? Is your investment in strengthening the bond between the two of you, or is your investment in turning away? Is your investment in committing? Or have you started to consider your options for, would my life be better off without this person? Mm-hmm. So where is your emotional investment?
Where's your emotional investment, and what's important to you? How do you prioritize? And so what you're identifying are key components to knowing, what's worth it? What's worth staying together? What's worth fixing?
Right. And when we talk about emotional investment, we also want to think in terms of, are the two people in this relationship, do they want the same thing? Is their emotional investment the same? Is it to continuing and strengthening the relationship? Because if both people are not equally involved in that process, then we're going to have little result.
Little result and continued conflict. And then, also the other thing is that when you think about an issue that isn't resolved, it can fester.
Absolutely, and that brings me to my second point. When I think of the three most important things I want to look at, the first being where's your emotional investment, the second thing is how do we go about conflict resolution? And we have to take a real close look at, we've tried effortlessly to resolve this conflict, and we come up with the same results. That's when people, go outside of the relationship to look for help and guidance in that area. We have to look at our patterns. Are we defensive? Are we non-defensive? Because defensiveness can be very corrosive. Are we blaming versus taking personal responsibility and accountability? Because blaming can be very corrosive to a relationship. And we get really ingrained in patterns of behaviors like blaming and defensiveness.
So, and what that kind of entails is almost like who's taking responsibility for it, who's at fault, and that blame game is actually, it's very toxic.
It's very toxic, and you can't have personal accountability and blaming at the same time. And when we're blaming, we're expecting our partner to do something different rather than looking at ourselves and talking about what could I do differently in this relationship.
Right.
And sometimes that just means talking to your partner in a rational way about this is how I'm feeling and this is what I need from you, rather than blaming him when it doesn't go right.
So what are my needs, and are they getting met?
Yes.
And that is it's actually very important. If your needs aren't getting met, and so then that means that you're consistently looking. I mean, we're drawn towards resolution. And we ask for it from our partner. And sometimes if it doesn't come, then and essentially it creates more resentment. It creates more standoffness and times where you don't speak to each other. And I actually read an article that talked about a conflict being more like an infection or a broken leg, and how you have to treat a broken leg. You have to elevate it. You have to set it. If you don't work on it, if you don't keep, let's say if there's a puncture, you don't keep it clean, there's going to be an infection. So it really does take a lot of upkeep.
Investment, absolutely. So where is your emotional investment? And is your investment in resolving the conflict? Do we want to move in a healthy direction where we're focusing on investing in the bond rather than investing in, I'm right, I blame you. The blame game is corrosive, and you have to put investment in the relationship. Absolutely.
Investment in the relationship. What else do you have to say about it?
Well, I also think that the third thing that I look at when I look at a couple who's struggling is the trust factor. And we tend to think of trust as something that, what I will say is that what researchers are showing is that it's the little collection of things over time that develop the trust relationship. Research is showing us that things like having good boundaries, being reliable, being personally accountable, showing integrity are little things that we do on a daily basis that create a trusting relationship. And so, you have to ask yourself, am I doing those things for my partner? Am I, displaying trust for them?
Yeah, and Holly, would you agree that everybody at some point experiences turbulence in a relationship? I mean, is that a true statement?
Absolutely. You can't have a truly intimate relationship without there being conflict.
And on a scale of hierarchy, where would you put trust?
I would put trust at the forefront of a relationship. And that includes trusting yourself. Because you have to ask yourself, do I deserve what I expect from other people?
Yeah. And I think that's super important. If you don't have trust, then you don't really have a foundation. And if your expectations and you're trying to build a life together, and whether it be that you're married, dating, or whatever, cohabitating, it doesn't matter. That's the safety of family, the safety of having a partner.
Absolutely. And again, if we think about trust as something that evolves over time, if we think of trust as something that just the little things, then we're talking about deposits in our emotional bank account. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about conflict resolution, if I trust that somebody is continually over the course of time shown that they're invested in me, that they show concern and care for me, then if we have a conflict, I am more likely to forgive any errors or mistakes. That if my partner comes up to me and apologizes for something that they may have said, then if I know that over time they have invested in our relationship and in my emotional bank account, then I'm more likely to come to a point of resolution versus holding resentment.
And that particular point, somebody has to drop their guard. Somebody has to come first. If you have two odds, then you can't really bridge the gap. You can't really address the real issues.
Right. What am I invested in? Am I invested in being right? If I'm invested in resolving the conflict, if I'm invested in moving towards a more intimate relationship, then I've got to put my guard down. That requires being vulnerable. And we're only going to be vulnerable with those people that we trust. And again, trust is something that comes over time. Mm-hmm. If I consistently know that I can count on you, if I consistently know that in the past you've shown concern and care for my feelings, if I consistently see that you respect my boundaries and that you're aware of mine, then I am more likely to trust you. And I'm then more likely to work with you to resolving the conflict.
Holly, I can really tell your heart's in this. How did you get involved in counseling?
Oh my gosh, it was a long time coming. I just always loved working with people. I love the way our mind and our hearts work. And I've just always been drawn to just talking with people and helping them work towards problem solving.
Yeah, how long have you been doing this?
Been doing this about 20 years.
And in the 20 years you've been working with couples, you've seen a lot of success?
I have seen a lot of success. For the people who come in early on the front end, because another important component in couples work is if they come in too late, their energies are depleted. They've gotten to the point where they no longer care anymore. They're so full of resentment and negativity that they don't have any fight left in them. So for the people who come in and they still have the energy, they still have the shared commitment, absolutely is successful. It just kind of helps invigorate their relationship and put it on the right track. Unfortunately, for some people, they come in after things have gotten out of hand, and that's more difficult.
But it's never there's never a point where you can't start. I mean,
absolutely, always start. Never
somewhere, right?
Yes.
It doesn't matter where you are. I mean, you don't give up the fight.
You never give up the fight. As long as somebody is invested in the process, as long as you're invested in the process, you fight for it.
That's awesome, Holly. Well, that is really, really good information. And I can tell how passionate you are about it and how dear it is to you. And so, Holly, Center for Social Success, thank you so much for coming to the show. When we come back today, we're going to talk to Kelly Antwine from the Reboot Ranch. Tune in. And we are back. If you are just tuning in, we are talking about mending broken relationships. We have two awesome guests here with us today. Kelly Antwine from the Reboot Ranch in Dallas, Texas. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Rusty.
And we did speak earlier. So tell us a little bit about you, Kelly, and Reboot Ranch.
Well, Reboot Ranch Recovery is a practice that I have here in Dallas, and I named it Reboot Ranch for people who want to reboot their life or reboot their relationship or whatever the case may be.
So Reboot, I like that. That's really catchy. How did you get into this? And first, tell me a little bit about what you do regarding this topic.
Well, I began being a therapist at the age of 5 because someone in my family needed to be a counselor, and I seemed to be the only one qualified. So. The fact is that, that's when our relationships or our experience with relationships really starts, is in our family of origin. And most of us, 97% of all American households, are dysfunctional in some capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And so we begin at a very early age to learn how not to be relational with people, to be honest and open and vulnerable. I believe that there are two things that every single human being on the face of the planet need more than anything else, and that is to be heard and to know that they matter. And so many times when a child is expressing their feelings, the adults that are around that child are attempting to comfort the child in some way, but they're denying the child's feelings. And a child becomes very confused and doesn't understand how to trust themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so the relationship, I think, that is the most critical, that is mended first, is the relationship with ourselves. We have to begin to look within, because if we are not whole people, we can't possibly understand how to be relational with anyone else. Because what we're typically trying to do is we're trying to get that other person to provide us something that we need that they may not even possess.
It's called unfinished business.
Unfinished business, exactly. And between the ages of birth and 2 years old, we're about as perfect as we're ever going to be. And then between 2 and 6, we find ourselves part of this deal called a family. And depending upon where we are in birth order, we've got these two big people that seem to be in charge of everything. And we start trying to fit in, because children between the ages of 2 and 6, developmentally, they want to belong. And so we begin to adapt our behavior in such a way that we can feel comfortable that we do belong. But the problem is that because our families are dysfunctional, between the ages of 6 and 17, we begin to develop maladaptive behaviors to deal with the insanity of the reality that we're living in. And then we carry that on into our adulthood, into our relationships, and it just doesn't work anymore.
So, and that's a really tall order for a lot of people, is to look at themselves.
Absolutely.
And we were just talking a lot about how, and on these relationships, whether you're married, dating, cohabitating, there's that shift. There's a tendency to blame. There's a tendency to look at your partner and blame, and look at how your needs aren't getting met. And now this perspective is, well, stop. Let's look at yourself, and let's look at some of these more core issues on the inside.
Right. Typically, when couples are beginning to argue, and Holly made some fantastic points. When they begin to, if they're not invested in healing the relationship, there's not many therapists out there. I don't know if I could possibly heal somebody's relationship. That's not my job. My job is to help people understand what they're bringing to the table and what's reasonable to expect from their partner. Hollywood and television has done more to cause problems in the relationships of today than anybody else. The movie Jerry Maguire, when Renee Zellweger told Tom Cruise, "You complete me." Well, if we were to look at that realistically, that would mean that Renee Zellweger was incomplete. And I personally believe in the law of attraction, which is you get back what you put out. So if I'm an incomplete person, I'm going to attract another incomplete person. And two incomplete people cannot be in a relationship. You have to have two whole people to be in a relationship. You have to have two
whole people, and you consistently try to get your needs met through the other person, and It could be more than they're able to actually provide you.
And, when a partner is being critical, I guess is the right word, of, say my behavior, I have to be listening with ears to hear what part of that is true. What part of that do I need to take in and look at as this is my behavior and it's affecting this person in that particular manner, rather than immediately going to fight or flight and begin to try to defend myself, which is what typically most couples do. Would you agree, Holly?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We get into defensive mode almost automatically.
Yeah. So
there comes then the conflict. Therein lies the conflict. And it's really not about finances a lot of times. It really may not even be about, the issue at hand. Well, you didn't throw me a party, or we didn't do this together, or you always blame me for this. So it's actually, there's a strive, there's a need to feel connected or complete, and you're consistently trying to find that need to get met.
Absolutely. If they were talking about finances as a problem area in their relationship, it might not necessarily be about the finances as much as it is feeling valued. We all have a need to feel as if we are worth something in the relationship, that we matter to this person. And that's a love language that a lot of people have, is that, if you're providing for me, then you love me. If you're allowing me to pursue a hobby or pursue something that I'm interested in, then that is an indication that you love me, that you care about me. And so a lot of times our words that we speak are not necessarily adequate to really express what it is that we're feeling on the inside. And typically, men don't know how to do that anyway.
Oh, yeah, we're dumb animals in that field.
Well, Holly mentioned the word intimacy, and the word intimacy can be broken down into 4 words: into me see. And most men think intimacy is about sex, and it's not about sex at all.
It's about caring. It's about appreciating. It's about giving yourself and accepting, and that involves being very fluid,
being vulnerable enough to allow another person to see who I really am. And I'm terrified of that.
And vulnerability it's a tough thing to establish initially. You think about like the whole concept of attraction. Kids, it was funny. I had this epiphany the other day. I was like, well, 20-somethings are really attractive. They're fit, they're good looking, they look great, they're clubbing, they're out there dancing around, and so it's like it's almost like some sort of evolution where you attract a mate, and you go out and you attract people by the way you look and some of these characteristics, and then you get to know each other and you laugh and you find, well, this person kind of compliments me, makes me feel good about myself. But then, as the honeymoon stage is over, here come the real issues. Okay, so going out with friends, or if you move in together, now finances become a big issue, and so there's a lot of turbulence. And I think every single relationship is going to experience turbulence, and it's just natural. If you get married, if you're living together, if you're together for years, it's coming. And you can almost guarantee that you're going to experience some level of conflict in some degree, and it could be something that will not get resolved.
Interestingly, Dr. John Gottman, who is the world's foremost expert on relationships, states that the primary key to any healthy relationship is friendship. And we don't give ourselves enough time to get to know people before we're jumping into bed with one another. And a relationship has a maturation process that it goes through. And if introducing the sexual or the physical component into a relationship too early stops that maturation process, especially for men. And, it's about really getting to know another person as a person rather than as an object.
Right. And in appreciating them and falling in love.
Absolutely. Allowing yourself the privilege of giving and receiving that emotion, that love.
And if you think about it, let's fast forward. Let's say that you have family now, right? And whether it be your family is your partner, whether your family is your partner and kids, or whether it's you and your grandparents and your children, many faces of family these days. Family is a safe place. It is where you go and come, and it's where you recharge. It's where you feel like absolutely comfortable. And the establishing a relationship and going through these broken aspects of it is the road to actually establishing that foundation. Would you agree, Kelly?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, again, it's about being able to just be yourself and feel comfortable and safe. That level of safety. And, you know, when we're talking about mending broken relationships, I do a lot of work with parents and adolescents. And the break in that relationship is that the kids don't feel safe to talk to their parents because they're immediately jumping to the conclusion that if I tell my parents this, then there's going to be negative consequences associated with it, and I'm going to be in trouble, which equates to they're not going to love me anymore. So
very powerful. We're talking to Kelly Antwine from the Reboot Ranch in Dallas, Texas. We're going to have to cut to commercial. We'll be right back. Please stay tuned. Welcome back to the Therapy Hour with Rusty Lozano. We are talking about mending broken relationships. And we have Kelly Antwine from the Reboot Ranch Recovery Practice in Dallas, Texas, and Holly Fedro from the Center for Social Success. And we're talking to Kelly. Kelly, tell us a little bit about how you got into counseling. Like, what got you here?
Well, I'll tell you, Rusty, when I was a freshman in college, my dad and I were having a conversation, and he asked me what I was going to major in college, and I told him that I was going to major in that I was really leaning towards mass communications with an emphasis in radio and TV. And he looked at me with this scrunched up look on his face and asked me, he goes, "What are you going to do with that? You just need to go get a business degree." And so, you know, being the people pleaser that I was, I ran off and got a business degree. And honestly, I hated every minute of it. And I didn't really enjoy it. And so at one point in my life, I had an opportunity to work at a treatment center down in Houston, and I enjoyed that quite a bit. And so I started pursuing getting back into counseling, procuring my LCDC. And I met a gentleman in practice, and he said, if you really want to pursue this, you need to get a master's. And I was 49 years old, and I thought, I can't possibly go back and get a master's degree. And as it turns out, I did, and that's how I kind of got into it. But it's such a great profession to be able to help people.
It's gratifying, isn't it?
It is very gratifying, especially when you're working with people who really want help. Now, I think we all have people in our practice that are there for maybe the wrong reason, but trying to fix someone else. But when they're really there to fix themselves, it really does.
Yeah, and there's a lot of passion. I could tell there's a lot of passion in what you are saying and how involved you are with people and your patients.
I love what I do, and I really love working with the individuals and families and that I work with. So
it's good stuff. You know, guys, the holidays are coming, and next week's segment is actually going to be on how to survive the holidays with family members. But you know what the holidays are, don't you, Rusty? What's that?
It's that time of the year when we leave our friends and loved ones to go be with family. So.
That's awesome. That's very true too. You know, so these couples, these people now that are struggling with this, are going to have to all of a sudden contend with trying to seem like the happy couple, trying to seem like the happy party, in the face of all the, whether it be like your own family, whether it be you're going to a friend's house. And so it's like you have to put your differences aside, but still there's that rift, that awkward rift. You ever been somewhere and you've been in discontent with your partner and you have to kind of play it off like everything is cool, but really you aren't really that in a line with each other. So what sort of helpful tips can you give to people that might be able to help them with that?
I mean, look, I think we have to talk to one another. I think that we're so afraid to let people know how we feel and what we need. And then when our needs aren't met, inside we're angry and we feel disappointed and dissatisfied. But what if we actually sat down and talked with our partner and let them know what we want and what we expect. And surely if we say it in the right way, our partner is attentive enough, concerned enough, caring enough to hear what we're saying.
Even if you can say, let's give a rain check on talking about this, but let's just put our differences aside. Let's just really have a good time tonight and just drop things. And
knowing when to stop the argument, knowing when to set it aside, absolutely. Compartmentalize. We can talk about this later. We're walking into a party. We want to have fun. That's something that we're both invested in.
And it only comes around once a year, and, this is going to be a good one. What do you think, Kelly?
Well, I think you can always try to just be in the moment and let the past go and not worry so much about the future, but just be in the moment. But, there are a lot of couples this time of year that the big issue is, now don't drink too much.
Don't hide behind the bottle of wine. Exactly.
And, so that becomes a real issue. And, I've dealt with couples before that was the major problem. And so going to parties is the source of the problem a lot of times.
Yeah. And don't try to pick up this conversation on the way to or on the way home from. Really set aside the day. Say, look, this is a day that we're not going to talk about this. We're together for a reason. And that's one thing I always tell patients. You're together for a reason. You're still together. You're working through this, and there has to be some reason you're still together. So let's just say this day we're going to just put our differences aside and have a good time.
Having fun is imperative. You have to set aside time for having fun. And so absolutely I agree with you on setting aside the time to just go and enjoy one another's company.
I mean, let's go to a concert, Yes. I mean, they're only coming around. This is like they haven't been on tour for ages. Let's just go.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, it should be that easy.
The holidays, unfortunately, become so stressful. We have all these, I ought to do this, I should be doing this. The list becomes endless. And we get so bogged down by that we forget about enjoying our partner or enjoying our family. That's really what it's all about.
And is that really minimizing the issues?
Not necessarily. I mean, what Holly was just talking about, enjoying the moment. Thanksgiving, when have we gotten beyond the fact that it's a time to give thanks? I love having people and being with people who are willing to take the time to go around the table and have every person talk about what they're thankful for. It's not just about stuffing ourselves with food to the point that we have to take a 3-day nap. Take a 3-day nap, Yeah.
Yeah.
But really and truly being in that moment. Christmas, as an example, is a time for kids. I mean, that's just. I have grandchildren now, and it's just so wonderful to watch them experience Christmas. And that's what it's really about.
It really is what it's about. And you're there for somebody else, and like there's a bigger job you have. But have you guys ever experienced this? I know my wife and I in the past have we've gone somewhere and we haven't been in the best of places, but then in the moment, we're at a party. There's that time when you walk by the other person and you just kind of look at them and you just start laughing and you're snickering because you're kind of mad at each other and but then that you're not getting along, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, yeah, come on, sorry. Have you guys ever experienced that before?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, being able to laugh at yourselves and yourself in a relationship is one of the most healing things that you can do. It shows, it's an indicator that you truly enjoy one another and that you can even see your own ridiculousness in a situation.
And if you can put yourself in that moment, I mean, if you can actually create those circumstances, go to a concert, go to a party, go to dinner, you might have an opportunity for something like that. And it's not, in my opinion, I don't think that it's minimizing anything because we still have things we need to talk about, but at least your guard is down.
There's a time and a place for everything. I mean, there's going to be more than enough opportunity to discuss the disagreements and the things that, create conflict in our lives. But there has to be set aside a time for fun and enjoying one another.
Yeah, you know what it reminds me of? I used to have this old junky Porsche 914 in high school, and sometimes it wouldn't crank with the key. But if I was going forward fast enough, I could put it in second gear and pop the clutch, and boom, the engine would start. It's kind of what it's like. You actually build some momentum because you're together and like you're hanging out and you're having a good time. And then it's easier to actuate like recovery. It's easier to actuate like connection.
Absolutely. It's kind of that emotional investment. It's like when we go out and have fun together, we have just put some coins in our emotional bank account so that there's more resiliency. Now we've had fun together. Now, if you do something that's disappointing or frustrating to me, I'm not going to be nearly as agitated by it because I'm reminded that I truly enjoy you. And so going out and having fun is one of the best things that we can do to make an emotional investment in the relationship.
Even if you're angry at your partner or you're not getting along, still get them a ticket.
Still get them a ticket.
Still count on them being there, even though you're not having a good time, because they're going to. I mean, and then like that can actually cause another issue down the line. Would you agree, Kelly?
Oh, you know what's amazing about this subject is that a lot of times people will be having an argument, and then you will ask a week later, well, what were you arguing about? And they'll go, I don't even remember what we were. And so it just is an indication that so many times our arguments are so minuscule. I mean, it's the minutia of life, and it's not even maybe about that subject. It's stress that we're carrying around from work or whatever that we come home and we dump on our partner or on our children or whatever. And had a guy, I told him, I said, if you get angry with your wife, call me. And I said, but don't call me after 10 o'clock at night because I go to bed at 10. And he said, well, what am I going to do if I need to talk to you after 10? I said, call me the next day. And he goes, well, I might have forgotten what it was about by then. So
I'd like to thank my guests today, Kelly Antwine from the Reboot Ranch Recovery Practice in Dallas, Texas, and Holly Fedro from the Center for Social Success. Excuse me. We've been talking today about how to recover a broken relationship. And next week, we're going to talk about how to actually survive the holidays with family and, those annoying ones. Family, and we're going to have a really great guest. Dr. Riella is going to be with us. So tune in next week, and we will see you guys again. Take care.